Hello and welcome to another episode of The Summer of Me. We are back with Nana. Group therapy, which is not theoretically group therapy, but we're calling it group therapy, where you guys get to ask her questions. And most of these questions come from Instagram, but we also gathered a couple questions that like you get asked frequently, whether it's in therapy or whatever. If you didn't watch the last group therapy, Nana is my mom. Tammy is her name. And she is a licensed therapist who's been practicing therapy in a private practice for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And she is full of wisdom and knowledge, and we are just grateful to have her. Thanks for being here, Mom.
Thank you for having me.
Flew her all the way out here just for this.
Yes.
Just kidding. Fringe benefits.
Yes,
exactly. You get to see your grandkids.
Exactly.
And all right. And me. Yes, yeah. And me. That's the real benefit. We are talking about marriage today. So not divorce. We are actually talking about like how to function well in a marriage, how to be a great spouse, how to thrive in a marriage, how to work through stuff, all of those things. We were just talking off camera really quickly, and I told her, I was like, stop talking. Because one of the things you said, which I thought was really interesting, is your least favorite type of therapy is marriage therapy.
True.
Why is that?
Because usually people, by the time they come to therapy, one of them has already made a decision to be out. And I take it, I want to help people. And so when helping them means a marriage dies, it's just been really hard to watch because I feel like if people would, I prefer to work with couples who are like either not married yet and coming to therapy. So yeah, dating, engaged or whatnot, or they're coming with some communication issues as a very big prevention.
Like a proactive sort of therapy.
Yeah. And usually that's not the case. So by the time somebody comes to therapy, like I say, one's already has one foot out the door. I pick up on that.
You're refereeing at that point.
And at some points, some marriages don't need to make it. It's better for both parties long term if they don't. And
talk about that for a second because we were raised Christian. We were,
right.
My dad was, he's no longer alive, but Dad was divorced twice before you guys got married.
I was a superstar, superstar wife over here.
Number 3. Anyways.
I made it the longest.
They were married. Did you just say you made it the longest?
I did.
He died.
25 years though.
Okay. Anyways, they were married for 25 years, got a divorce. He died shortly after that, and then got remarried. You've now been married to Ray for almost 15 years, 14 years.
Yeah.
And so I think the people come to you and are like, oh, divorce is bad. I shouldn't get a divorce or,
especially as Christians.
As a Christian, do you believe in this and whatever? And to your point, what you just said is like, not all marriages necessarily are meant to work. Like it's just at some point, like you have to accept that maybe that's not the case.
And some marriages didn't start as Christian marriages.
Or didn't start as healthy marriages.
What I mean by that is we put that on God, which isn't fair to do. Like we have this Christian marriage. Well, we lived together, had sex together. We did all these other things together. We didn't really follow God's plan for our life. But now that we are married and we're going to call ourselves in this Christian marriage, I say, great. So you won't be in therapy if you're living a true Christian marriage because your sex life is going to be great. Your communication is going to be good. And for that, which it isn't, you're going to have brought in somebody because that's what the scripture says, right? You're going to bring somebody in to help you with it. And if that person can't help, you'll bring a second person in. But nobody seems to do that. So they're not really living the Christian marriage, but they won't get a divorce because it's not Christian-like. And so it doesn't go together. Yeah. And so the recipe really isn't being practiced, but yet they want to stay stuck. They want to follow the rules that and so really so that part is really challenging. And so I believe that you change as you're married, right? You change, hopefully you grow. And sometimes we don't grow together, we grow apart. And there's ways that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's one of the questions somebody asked. In any case, like if you're trying to make a marriage work, a lot of these questions kind of are in relation to that. And some of them are just like proactive things. The first question somebody asked was, what is a best practice to avoid straying from a marriage?
Right.
And I don't know the content, meaning like if they're trying to like avoid straying to like somebody else or just like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like what are daily practices that you can do to avoid that?
Friendship. So play together, to me, is a really, really important ingredient in marriages that are successful. Is if you're playing together, you're having fun together, you're having shared experiences together, I think that your friendship is continuing to grow. Yeah. I think one of the things that has really helped me is Ray could probably care less about going out on the lake, for example, but he loves to watch me go on the lake. He loves
By go on the lake, she means jet ski.
Jet ski. Yeah. And so, I don't jet ski that, wild with Ray, but he loves that I enjoy those things. And so celebrate the other person's interest so that, and then the other biggest thing to keep, so when someone asks me if they're straying, that tells me that they're probably tempted by somebody outside of their relationship that is giving to them
what they're not receiving in their marriage.
Right. And so ask for it, demand it in a way of saying, hey, it doesn't have to be a big reason to go to therapy. Recognize what is that person, because sometimes you can't help that. A person walks across your path, you didn't even know that you had that void in your life until somebody awakens you to it, and then you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Like I feel like the worst human because all of a sudden I have feelings for somebody, and it's not my husband, right? I get it. I understand how that can happen. Wake up. Come back now and say to your husband, hey, we need to go to therapy. There's an area that I'm not happy with. I feel very alone. I feel very lonely, to your point, in previous ones. But get honest and get some outside help for that if you can't talk about it.
I think people are so afraid to ask for things because I'm assuming because they're fear of rejection. Like they're afraid that their spouse is going to be like, what are you talking about? Or you don't need that or whatever.
Yeah. And then that adds to but again, trust the process. If you're able to communicate through and have hard, it all starts with us. We have to validate our own feelings first. So even going to therapy by yourself is risky business, but and I say to people, you're going to get worse before you get better because all of a sudden we're uncovering a lot of things, right? But if a marriage, obviously, if you grow together and you're kind of working towards the common goal, don't assume that just because your spouse used to like something a year ago that they're still liking it. Get curious. That's another way.
So true.
There's a really fun games out there where you can play like getting to know each other.
Yeah, we play that.
Date. Be romantic. Kiss. These are ways to like
Smooch.
The 6-second kiss is a real thing, right? We stop making out the longer we're married. It's the weirdest thing, but I cannot tell you how many couples don't make out. They stop doing that. They go to granny kisses. Well,
Parents don't have sex.
By the way, this is your biggest sex organ right there.
Yeah.
So when we first start dating somebody, we're all kissing.
Yeah, it's true.
We stop doing that, and that connection begins to stray. So those are ways. I remember, your needs, all of a sudden your top need, once it's met, then the next one starts to surface. And it's like, that's important to me. I didn't realize how important. Now it's important. Try to communicate that. And if you feel shut down, get help. Create a crisis before the real crisis. Enter therapy.
Yeah, I talked about that. And I remember you saying, like, sound the alarms. Like,
it is important because you don't think that you're going to leave. But I'm telling you as a therapist.
I remember telling you, do you remember this conversation? I mean, this was probably a year and a half before we even separated.
Yeah.
And I was like venting about something and talking about something. And you said, and I said, I think I said it or you prompted it or something like that. And I was like, I mean, I'm not going to leave. It's not like I want a divorce or anything like that. I'm just like really upset with, it was had to do with something with like a family dynamic, some in-laws stuff and whatever. And I remember like saying that to myself because I was like scaring myself a little bit, like, oh my God, like I'm even, the very, 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 very back of my brain is even thinking about this. Like, and I remember saying that. And then like, obviously here I am like years later, but I think that's an important thing to note.
What did I say?
You had said like, or like, are you thinking about like leaving? Like, is it like bad, And
I think that's the thing that is really, I'd be a millionaire for every time I heard somebody say, it's not like I'm leaving or anything because they retract it as quick. And it's like, but pretend that you are to create that urgency, if you will, because it doesn't go away.
No.
The need does not go away. So, and for me, like when I went through my divorce, so many, especially of Christians who are living in my mind, dishonest, not loving, caring relationships, dishonest ones, were so disappointed. But the reality is, I think it's really important. If you were to live honestly, would your spouse be blown away by how you feel? If you were really to tell them.
Well, you hear that all the time. People that have been married, we're married for 50 years, 47 years, whatever. And like 9 times out of 10, like they're really unhappy, or they're maybe not 9 times out of 10, but like a lot where it's like, I had some girl on my Instagram questions be like, how do you deal with, like, my parents, they've been married for 47 years, but they're still like wildly unhappy and they bitch about each other to me, their child, like all the time. Like, how do I set a boundary with that or something? And I think people have put this trophy on, like, I've been married for so many years, but like, if you're not happy, like,
if you're not able to be who God, in that whole Christian idea, if you're not able to be who God called you to be, then who are you serving, the marriage or God? Because he doesn't make mistakes. Then who you are becoming and who you feel like you're being called to become may not fit here, but it's not because it's really back again. Is this person willing to celebrate you? 14 years in my marriage now, I am not the same person Ray married 14 years ago. No. And thankfully, he isn't either. So we both have been able to grow together. And I feel like that's the difference between the 25-year marriage where I grew and Dad didn't.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. That brings me to another question that somebody asked, which is, how do you handle being in a marriage where you're growing and your spouse isn't, or you're growing at a much faster pace and your spouse isn't, or your spouse just says, like, I don't need to change, which I know you experienced with Dad. Even, like, you were like, I'm growing, I'm learning all these things, I'm becoming somebody, and like, he's like, I'm just who I am, kind of thing. And I know that's a case for a lot of people, is like, they're with, somebody asked, like, how to deal with emotionally, how to deal with an emotionally immature spouse, or just somebody who's not growing alongside of you.
I think, so number one, you matter. I think that is really always my message. You matter. You're not a mistake. Your thoughts, your ideas, your wants, your desires. And I think I like to say it's sort of like, if your core needs are being met by your spouse, your changes may not affect so totally your marriage, right?
Yeah.
They don't need to do everything you want to do. But if that person's like not wanting you to grow and become who you feel called to become, then again, they get to choose to not grow, but they may not get to keep you in this marriage because of that. And so free yourself from, living that small kind of, the person that you're not meant to be. You can't, we're all meant to grow and change.
Right. Like, there's no reality in which you get married at, let's just say 25, and at 40, you're that same person.
I would hope not.
Right. So how do you communicate to your spouse, hey, I'm really growing, like, I'm working through something, or I'm,
if they're not interested,
like, I'm growing.
You let them know that, hey, your lack of interest, or and again, we use therapy sadly as this alarm bell thing. Like, well, then we need to go to therapy. Like, it's an either or, like, or we're done. Well, in reality, you probably could have been in therapy 5 years ago. So do it 5 years ago. In other words, really, I just would encourage people to tell their spouse, I'm unhappy in this area, and if we don't work together on this, I don't know what the future holds. Well, you don't have to threaten. You don't have to threaten here.
Yeah.
You simply, the reality is this: I don't know what our future holds. Because again, you're upholding your end of the commitment. You're still loving a person, but it doesn't mean when we make that commitment that I'm gonna love you only if you're this version of you.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, you don't have to sound an alarm. Like, it doesn't have to be some big ordeal. You don't have to get cheated on, or somebody's doing all these things to go to therapy. Like, it can say, like, hey, I'm not feeling like my need is being met here, or like, would you be open to going to therapy with me, and we can talk through this with somebody?
Right. Or even start. Yeah. Because the truth is, marriage therapy doesn't work. We statistically know this, by the way. It doesn't. And for the reason I said before, which is, by the time people really go to therapy, it's sort of, they're at that, like, this is what you're supposed to do before you free yourself to call it quits.
To check the box.
It's a check a box. Don't go to therapy as a check the box. Honestly, people, go to therapy or invest in, again, learning. There's lots of books out there. There's a lot of things you can go do. It's the action of, we're both invested in the same goal, which is having that overlapping circle of, you matter, I matter, and the us matters.
Mm-hmm. Another topic that came up that I've dealt with greatly is in-laws. This is like a very, very hot topic. And a lot of the questions came up, which were like, how do I set boundaries with in-laws? My husband tends to prioritize his family over our family. And, how do I talk to him about that? And I obviously have a lot of experience. This is something that I believe greatly contributed to the reason, like some of the reasons that we got divorced, was I never felt heard. I never felt like I was an important part of that dynamic. There was boundaries that were never set.
Your feelings were never validated.
My feelings were never validated. There were so many situations in which I was like, can we please like say this or, you know, and it's so like as somebody who's gone through that, obviously, like, you know, the solution was like, there was no solution at the end of the day. That problem never, ever got solved.
It did get solved.
Well, we got divorced.
You left.
I left, but I'm saying like in a marriage, we were never successfully able to solve that in a marriage. Right. What would you tell people, either number one, like people that are newly married or getting married, how to kind of set that boundary out of the gate? But even in my situation, there was boundaries that were set, but my spouse we were not on the same page. It was like, well, they're my parents. Do you want me to just never see them? Should I never talk to them? Like, you don't love them? Like, they love us so much. They love the kids so much. Like, and I'm over here like feeling like, oh my God, like if I have to see these people one more time, I'm going to simply like wither away and die, because they were so awful. And you know, there was so many,
they weren't kind to you.
They were not kind to me. And there were so many tragic situations, honestly, that I dealt with for a decade, you know, and even when we dated and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But what do you tell people? Cause I know that comes up in therapy.
It does.
For you all the time.
And it's the same thing. And I know I talk to you a lot about it as well. It is not an in-law issue. This is a spouse
100%.
issue. This is not you would not have in-law issues if your spouse would take the necessary steps to heal their own issues. You did not marry your in-laws. Mm-hmm. So
felt like it.
Well, you did, but, and maybe there are a lot of people, because again, it comes back to the healing piece of your spouse, right? Are they willing to do the work to set the boundaries with their parents 100%. And their family? And if they're not willing to do that,
it's from their own childhood.
Early on, grooming from their childhood, right? Mm-hmm. But again, it does affect them. And that's usually the case. You have an intruding mother-in-law, or, you know, on either side, it could be the mom, mm-hmm. you know, the woman's mom, whatever. But I would say it is really you learning to communicate what's hurting, why it's not okay, with whatever's going on, and then you don't go. And so I have really helped a lot of people say, you know what, if you're going to choose to go there, because what we do is we give in, mm-hmm. and then that reinforces that it's really not that bad.
Well, or we got into a cycle in our marriage where it was like, well, they're not going to be around that much longer. Or like, you can just, you know, it's like, they're my parents, just like deal with it. And people would be like, oh, every parent is like the worst. And I'm like, I'm over here like shitting my pants from anxiety every Friday night, having to go to their house for dinner because I was worried of like how I was going to be treated and like the ways, the situations that I was going to be put in and whatever. And it's like, how am I supposed to just like, and then you start to gaslight yourself into being like, God, maybe I am being a high maintenance wife. Maybe I am like, you know, I should just deal with them. They're whatever. They're old people.
To your point, is all the things that you were told by whom? The spouse.
Yeah.
So the reality is it's a spouse issue. It's not an in-law issue.
Oh, for sure.
And when you say, I'm not willing to do this, mm-hmm. and the other interesting part of that is, you know, sometimes your husband, in this case, they would say, well, I'll just take the kids and go. Oh, you don't get to take my most precious, you know, part of me and leave me out because as if I'm the problem here. Mm-hmm. It's an issue. And it comes down to a really good reason to get into therapy on that one, because if you're having issues with in-laws, the person whose ever parents they are is really, really struggling to see how it's an issue because of their own crap.
Their own issues all that they need to deal with.
Yes. Yeah. It was like, hey, I'm not doing this. The kids and I are not going. If mm-hmm. you're choosing to go and spend your time this way, you know, or if you won't set this boundary, if you're going to bring your parent over here, I'm leaving mm-hmm. because I'm not willing to be hurt anymore. Mm-hmm. But it will create a huge wedge in the marriage.
Massive.
Because you deserve to be chosen. This person said, I want to marry you. Mm-hmm. It's not, I want my family and I to marry you. Mm-mm. So this is, again, pre-marriage stuff, something that really needs to be sorted out.
To your point, I don't know that we would have ever... Had I really been willing at a place in my like emotional maturity, so to speak, to deal with that at that time, we probably would have never gotten married, because this was an issue when we dated. I mean, and you tried to take a break and then you, that's part of it.
But
still, like, I was never really willing to be like, to put my foot down and be like, I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. Turns out I did it for, you know, another 15 years or 12 years before I was willing to.
And it's torture to watch as somebody who's trying, as an in-law who's trying to follow those and mm-hmm. respect the boundaries, respect rules, mm-hmm. or like, you know, to me,
it's little things. It's not like, oh, they're, you know, I hate you or whatever. It's like giving the kids treats when you're asking them not to give them treats, or like, hey, we don't.
That is a big one. Or like not following the parents' rules when the other parents, when their parents aren't around. It's like, in your case, it was like that, but that is a common theme of it. Or not really even talking to the spouse, but more addressing
Always.
everything with the child, with their child.
Family photos were always with like the spouse, and then like,
or guilting. This is another big one, like, I just really wish you guys could come over on this night, even after, you've already said no.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go to your spouse and they're like, please, can you just come over, please? And it's like that.
It's
but
so
again,
dismissive.
it's a really big sign of a codependent relationship, typically between the spouse
parent
and the in-laws. Yeah. And that needs to be addressed.
100%.
You deserve to be chosen.
Yeah. You deserve to be the number one priority.
You deserve to be, because again,
I'll never
you would
forget-
never tolerate somebody treating your spouse that way.
When my mother-in-law at the time told me that she just wished her son would choose her over me.
I will never forget that either.
What would your tips be for conflict resolution when two people like to be right?
I love this one, because if we're trying to be right, we're in positions, right? We're looking at I'm against you.
Mm-hmm.
I would say look at yourselves separate from each other. So there's the third piece. You guys are in a marriage. Don't take positions, number one, to be right or wrong. So think of it, this is going to seem really dramatic, but boy, my spouse is dying, and I'm sure glad I was really right on winning that argument. That's all ego. We don't, at the end of our lives, that's not what matters. Your number one goal is how do we get to the us? So if we're starting with the us position, you're not going to look at it like it's me against you. And so the minute you recognize I need to be right, correct yourself first and foremost.
To what?
To, hey, I need to find us a way to have a compromise here.
Yeah.
And we all want, that's all ego. We all want to be right, of course.
Yeah.
But we really are saying, I want you to validate my feeling, my thought, my whatever. Be more specific. What is it? These are my feelings. And just because you feel this way, again, doesn't mean that your spouse has to feel that way. And then we stop asking, we stop getting curious as to why. Why are we at opposite ends? And a lot of it is because we don't know how to validate feelings. We don't know, we think we should have the same experience. When you start questioning, like, instead of I cannot believe you're friggin' thinking that. Like, what? To, I'm curious why you're thinking that.
Dumb piece of shit.
And again, it is a hard trigger to get rid of.
Yeah.
But if you practice it from the us position, like, how do we resolve? At the end of the day, really keeping focused on what's the end goal.
Yeah.
The goal
not
is
keeping focused on like, I want him to tell me like, you're right, I'm wrong, versus like,
and
how
sometimes
do we get to a
want
place
to be
where it's like-
validated. Right.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how I felt that way? Can I imagine? I can see how you felt that way. I may not agree with it. I don't have to agree with
see
it.
where you're coming
but
from.
I can see where, if I put myself literally in what your perspective is, then I can see it from your perspective. It's crazy as hell, but I can still see it there. You don't have to agree, but what is the end goal of if I'm right, then what? Okay, you're right.
You don't get a
Trophy, like, now what? What did you accomplish for the us?
Yeah. You didn't. You probably the opposite, right?
Exactly.
Because you're creating a division when you're doing
now I'm right, and now you're wrong. Now what? Right? Where do we go from there? There's no healing in that. There's no progress in that. It's like, but we deserve to be validated. We all want our feelings. Everybody wants their feelings validated, not just you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's my world. You just live in it, right? Here's a good one. Help. I'm married to a narcissist.
Oh, sorry, baby. Micro drop moment. Sorry. I can't even lie about this. So narcissist, a person who meets the full criteria for narcissistic
this word
personality
gets
disorder.
thrown around a lot.
Does.
And people are like, he's a narcissist, this and that and the other thing. And like, so I think that's an important
There's
thing. first of all.
criteria.
There's criteria.
So every diagnosis, like when you hear somebody talk about anxiety, or for me, anxiety has a criteria in it that has to be met. Because we all have fight or flight instinct, which is called anxiety.
And
also.
like my therapist has said that we all have a narcissistic tendency.
We all have narcissistic tendencies. Yes. But there's 9 criteria to have a narcissistic personality disorder. You have to have 5 of them.
Okay.
Okay. 5 of the 9. Usually that person can never be wrong. They're going to end up, in a marriage situation, you're gaslit a lot. You're questioning your sense of reality a ton. Yeah. There seems to be no a lack of cause and effect. Like I caused you to, it's like always turned. If the apology is there, it's what I call a cheap apology. Like, I'm sorry you feel that way. Well,
Yeah.
screw you. You're sorry I feel this way doesn't say anything. So there's no real change. An apology should be always with change, right? So unfortunately, narcissists are very difficult to treat as a clinician because they last for maybe 6 sessions max, and then they're on to another therapist, or no therapy at all, because we're all stupid and they're way smarter than us, once they get called out. So read.
Yeah.
There is a ton of information out there on narcissists and covert narcissists. Covert narcissists are a little bit more subtle, a little more sly. And so, but you will get a lot of validation for your own feelings that is really key. Recognize, I teach teenage kids to recognize this in their parent, where they're trapped, they have no power. And so, now, having said that, some narcissists are very, very abusive. Some are less so. It's just really difficult. Are they learning and growing and changing? You might be able to tolerate, again, depending on what your love bucket needs. Are they filling it still, even if they're a narcissist? Are you getting good out of it? But more than anything, you have to understand what your role in that is. If you're expecting the narcissist to validate your feelings, to understand your story, to understand you're going to be really sad. If you validate that, and then you can tolerate, whatever that relationship is. I don't have a right to tell people how to live in their marriage. That wouldn't work.
Because you would say there are people that successfully live in a narcissistic marriage.
They've changed their expectations,
Yeah.
and what the good they get out of their relationship still works for them.
Yeah, it overpowers
we
them.
don't all need the same things out of a marriage, right? And so that's why it's like, it's not a set rule of, this is good or bad. But some narcissists are very abusive. But if it's truly a narcissistic person, you're living a very lonely existence because you don't matter.
It's their world and you live in it.
Right. But you can learn to prioritize yourself.
You're just not going to get that from them.
Right.
So how do you, what are some of the ways that you can deal with a spouse that is narcissistic or has narcissistic tendencies that are affecting the marriage?
So again, make sure you're learning and growing yourself. Set healthy boundaries for yourself and consistent boundaries. Because again, it's not that they're going to be respected, but when you respect your boundaries, you require less of the other person respecting them. You honor them. You don't feel guilty for saying no or for doing something that your spouse doesn't want you to do then. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so you create your own support system, and then you may be able to stay in that relationship if it, again, gives you enough of what you need out of it. But I would say, getting into therapy can help. Reading tons of stuff on the line so that you understand what you're feeling, honoring your own feelings, setting those boundaries with that person. Hey, if you're going to act this way, I'm going to do this.
Would you say if I'm in that position and I'm okay, my spouse is a narcissist, would you say tell them you're a narcissist? No, or you're
it would go nowhere, and it isn't beneficial. Because they're more than we're all more than just whatever our thing is. But it's like you can't, when you look at yourself, you really can't see what in your own eyes. They don't see it. Yeah. And it comes from a deep.
Are they doing it
insecurity. Intentionally? True abusive people can be very intentional about their abuse. Some narcissists are not as intentional with it, and therefore they're not as abusive with it, but they're still self-centered. They don't understand how they're being self-centered. They may not have insight into their behavior. And again, you can focus on helping them gain insight without having to label them. Saying, this is what I need. This, whether you agree with it or not, is irrelevant. Yeah. I matter here too. And so I feel like anytime we just label a person as one thing, we're kind of into trouble. Yeah, for sure. But people who have that personality disorder by criteria are just really difficult to live with because they lack the empathy. So they're not going to really see things from your perspective that you would like them to. Yeah, which makes conflict resolution nearly impossible. True. But you can do things like what we call gray rock them. So you don't react to their ups and downs, to their games. You turn to, you had to learn. You learn to not need them to validate your feelings in order for your feelings to be valid.
And maybe, would you say like that's oftentimes why a lot of those marriages end, is because you become so self-sufficient that it's like, unless you're really giving me a lot, like
Right.
I don't need you.
Right.
You're not
and some
here
people
emotionally.
stay because they don't want this, the to go through a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And so happy is a funny word, right? What is happy? But they made a choice to compromise in some other way.
Yeah.
But again, the biggest thing is, and I just want to repeat it, we don't need somebody else to validate our feelings in order for our feelings to be valid.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to practice that, pretty soon your expectations of other people will change.
Damn. Heard that. To sum things up, I think maybe if you can give us like your top 3 or 5 ways in which, like, I think what from my experience and like what we've talked about and just through like, therapy and all these things, like communication appears to be like kind of the number one, like, I think the thing that people struggle with, the thing that we feel like most insecure about, but also the thing that leads to the most change in a marriage. What would you tell people? Like, here's some ways to communicate, to grow your marriage.
Talk to your spouse the way you want to be talked to, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
Inquire, ask them questions. Don't assume you know the answer. Get curious about who they are, what they're listening to, what they're thinking and feeling. And when you communicate, you don't use you statements, you use I statements. I feel statements are harder to argue. Somebody may disagree with your feeling. It is your feeling. And you get to express your feeling, but you don't get to say, I'm you. The minute you do the you, all of a sudden that person's defense goes up. Yeah. And so I think communicating about the small things, I always say, take the little sliver out of your hand before your hand gets infected. Deal with, not minimize, deal with the little feelings, and you will probably be able to avoid the big
ones.
Hop
up and you're like, ooh,
just that you've been trained. It's not that big of a deal. I will just vacuum again and again and again and again, even though I'm developing resentment and I'm getting frustrated and I'm getting upset. Mm-hmm. I say deal with those little things and saying, when this happens, I feel this way. Mm-hmm. And people, especially men, don't like to hear, I feel lonely. I feel insignificant in this relationship. Use words besides, I'm just sad. Really get clear. And if you need help with how to define words, go to, Brene Brown. She gives you a lot of language skills about how you're feeling. And I think doing things like that also can really build communication with each other, how we communicate. There's, Deborah Tannen writes a book about You Just Don't Understand Me, or again, Brene Brown, Gottman's. Any of these are really good tools to start with, so we develop a common language on how to communicate our feelings, because again, we're not usually taught this.
Can you over communicate?
Says that my child, who doesn't like to talk about feelings. Yeah, you can, but you're usually doing that because you're trying to convince somebody because you're not feeling validated, right?
Got it. So you shouldn't need to over communicate, and over communicating really makes people tune out. Yeah, because you're just yapping in their ear.
Yeah, but some of us really like talking about feelings, and we don't call it over communicating.
It wouldn't be me.
That's true.
All right. Thank you for all of your wisdom and knowledge. If you have other questions, feel free to jump over to my Instagram at Kendra for now and send me a message, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube link, and we will be back soon with more episodes and more group therapy. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to The Summer of Me. You can listen to episodes on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube. Come hang out and follow my chaos on Instagram at Kendra for now. See you next time.